will have to do possibly two things. Grant me permission to record. Okay, recording has started. That's good. Okay, and then you can make me host.
There you go.
Okay, and now let me see, can I make Raminder host?
Or I can make Raminder host right away.
Okay, you can make Raminder host.
Yeah.
Make Raminder host.
I think Raghu, you'll have to make him host because you've already I've made you the host. So
yeah, I think so. So I'll make him host.
Yeah. Yeah, he's the host.
Raminder?
Yes.
You're now the host. It's yours. The floor is yours.
Okay. So what does it as a host?
You can share your screen and you can go ahead and you can present now.
Okay.
Yeah. And recording is on. So you can just get started as soon as you're all set.
Can you guys see that?
Yes, sir.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So thank you, everybody, and thank you for putting up with me. I'm going to talk about a little bit about sensors. I don't want to make it too technical. And actually, I'm not going to be able to talk about lenses. I couldn't put together enough material for that, so maybe at some other day. But just wanted to give a little bit of an intro to sensors, and then we'll go into a section on photography for birds or some amount of wildlife. But again, try a format, and hopefully you can keep it interactive. So let's start. So with digital photography, you now don't use film at all. So it reduces to using sensors. The two main types out there are the technologies are CCD, charge coupled devices, and then CMOS. Most of us, I assume, unless somebody is doing astronomy or some other specialized photography, and they would use CCDs, most of us, what we actually have are CMOS devices. And CMOS is, it's just a mass, in terms of mass production, it's cheaper, and it's the most commonly deployed one today. So what are the things about the sensor that matters, and why do we care about it so much? A few things, and they're related. The area of the sensor, the number of pixels, and size of a pixel. So obviously, if there's a given area of the pixel of the sensor, the total number of pixels, you divide the area by the number of pixels, you get the size of the pixel. So it's sort of, these are all related concepts. So these come in many different sizes, and there's like a whole history of them behind it. And Wikipedia and other sources have good descriptions for these things. But to go over some of the major ones, and primarily the ones that at least I'm familiar or I tend to use most, are the full frame. And when they say full frame, they actually mean something that is, what is the size of a original 35 mm film frame, and it's of that form factor. The other one that's most common is the APS-C, which is the third bullet, and Canon and Nikon have a slightly different form factor for those two. Now, there are a number of others. Those are not as common. But one thing to note is the larger the sensor, it typically results in a camera that is correspondingly bigger in size, and the lenses also tend to be affected by that. So one of the things to note is typically with full frame versus APS-C, one of the things that comes into, and I'm not going to go into mirrorless per se over here, but that's a slightly different dimension. It will show up as weight. And then the other main piece for this on sensors is how does it affect your picture taking? So one of the things to note is a subtle effect is that a larger sensor will imply more depth of I think it should be the other way. It should be smaller the depth of field. But basically, in order to fill the frame, you have to be closer to the subject or use a longer focal length, because your sensor will decide the focal length needed to fit that frame. And so that's how the depth of field gets affected. So you will have to move closer or use a bigger focal length. Now, the more relevant piece of it is when it comes to low light performance, and I am going to cover this in just one slide. But thing to remember is that there's this notion of noise and signal to noise ratio. And there's a portion of signal to the noise which is sort of independent of the size of the pixel. And then there's a portion which is proportional to, say, the number of photons hitting it. So the larger the pixel site or size of a pixel on the sensor, the more photons it can accommodate and the more current it can generate. So as a result, the signal level it can create is higher. And the signal to noise ratio proportionately will be higher for a larger pixel. So if you have two cameras, if you have two sensors, you have an APS-C sensor and you have a full frame sensor. Now the frame sensor is larger, and if both of them have the same number of megapixels, then the way you would say compare it is that, all other things being the same, the full frame sensor will have better signal to noise ratio, and it will perform better in low light situations than the APS-C sensor.
Yeah.
Right, and that's one of the things. Yeah. Was there a question? Okay. So that's one of the, I guess, the most useful pieces to look at when you're looking at sensors. The other thing is that
Raminder, in your second last bullet, signal to noise ratio improves with increase in pixel size. You mean pixel size or number of pixels?
pixel size. So you have this.
The smaller the number of megapixels, larger the pixel size.
Correct. So it means, so think of it as a bucket, and you're basically, the area of the pixel, right? So it can collect more photons.
Nice.
So the more photons it can collect and accumulate over time till it gets saturated, right? Basically, that corresponds to the signal. So there is a constant amount of noise, which is the thermal noise. Then the other portion of the noise is a short noise, which is proportional to the photons hitting it. But every time a photon arrives there and hits it, it generates plenty of signal also. So actually, in that case, the more photons hit it, yes, the signal, the short noise due to it goes up, but actually the signal goes up so much more that the signal to noise ratio improves anyway. Right. So then
what does that have to do with dynamic range? Can you explain that a little bit?
Okay. So the dynamic range is that basically how many levels can you break up? So from being completely black to being fully white or to be fully saturated, how many steps can I break it up into in terms of how many bits would I need to encode that, right? If I can break it up into 8 levels or 32 or 256 or 1K or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
So that means that I need to be able to discriminate at the level of the least significant bit.
Yeah.
Right. And in order to be able to do that, my least significant bit has to be more than the noise.
Yeah. Okay.
And so that's how it affects the dynamic range, right? So the noise, basically, the noise level limits the least significant bits value, or how much signal it can represent, right? So the lower the noise, the more levels I can discriminate. So the noise is not enough to confuse me between two adjacent levels. Okay.
Yep.
So remember, this is Mukul, will we be covering the graininess in the picture, which is probably what you mean by noise?
Yeah, I mean, we can talk. So graininess in the picture is basically because of noise, right?
Yeah.
So,
So now the question becomes, a lot of times, or at least on the Sony's, like it said the ISO range was 51,000, but even at 16, my pictures were extremely grainy.
yeah.
Nothing.
Okay. So, okay. And what kind of light conditions were you in? I mean, I'm assuming that if you're using an ISO that high, you were probably in poor light conditions.
And actually, funnily, it was in broad daylight, but my shutter speed was very fast. And that's where I ended up. So I could have taken it at 5K, but it was my first day with the camera. And I'm like, okay, if they said the sensitivity was 51,000.
Got it.
Anyway, go ahead.
So I think that goes back to Raghu's presentation, and when he talked about exposure, right? So he had three. So in exposure, you have the three components, which is shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. So in your case, so basically, okay. So to also set the stage for that, now in film, when you had, I think they used the term was ASA. You had different ASA film, like 100 ASA, 200, 400, and so on. Right, and that represented the light sensitivity of the film, and that was actually, like, you would have to have change film to actually get different light sensitivities. And sorry, was there somebody saying something?
No, I just agreed with you. I said right.
Okay, sorry. And so, and there it literally, I guess the silver halide crystals or whatever was used for film, they were of different sizes, and that's how they got the sensitivity differences.
So Raminder, I just wanted to add.
Please.
In film, the silver halide crystals were smaller for lower
ISO,
ISO, lower ASA, and they were bigger along the same principles that you're saying of the CMOS thing, right? So pixel, right? So it will gather more light quicker.
Yeah, and so, but because of that, the larger crystals created a more grainy
look.
effect.
Correct.
Yeah. So here the graininess goes in the other direction. I guess the smaller pixel sizes will create more graininess because of the signal to noise potentially. But the way a digital camera modulates the ISO is that it basically has an amplifier at the output of the sensor, which you modulate the gain of that amplifier to increase. So, imagine that you're getting from each pixel value, you're getting a little signal, you're getting some current, and then you're going to send it through an amplifier and increase,
Okay.
right? Now, what happens is that it, it, it will also amplify the noise because once it's collected there, and they do some amount of digital amplification also. So depending on how clean the analog amplification is, so it comes down to that. So
I
finally,
see.
what is coming out of the pixel, you cannot do better than that. Now it's a matter of just to make the picture look better, you increase the gain so that it's basically like brightening the picture in a sense.
Okay, makes sense. I was just confused that, see, I was not at the edge of the spec, right? So I was not at 50,000 on a camera that claimed 51,000 ISO. But if
Right.
at 16, it was so grainy. So I was just trying to figure out what would the ISO spec mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean,
Anyway.
the internal, the metering in the camera, I mean, given the settings you had for your shutter speed, would have then pushed up the ISO to meet the exposure requirements. And that's
Right. I actually let it adjust the depth, and I had fixed those two. But that's a separate conversation. Let's carry on.
Yeah.
Didn't need to take it. Okay.
So basically, I think the purpose behind the little bit on the sensor was to talk about there are different sizes. So I mean, when you just look at number of megapixels and things like that, that's only one piece of the story. The other thing to keep in mind is the size of an individual pixel, which is basically the sensor size divided by the number of megapixels. It's actually a little bit smaller than that, but because of spacing. But that's a good way to compare or to understand what you might get in terms of signal to noise ratio or in terms of low light performance.
So you had one,
you'll hear.
Sorry to
Please.
interrupt. You had one slide where you were showing the sensor sizes in different types of cameras. Is there one that compares with cell phone cameras? Or you have any number that you can quote for cell phone cameras?
Let me look up and find out.
Okay.
I mean, the cell phone side things gets a little bit more complicated and interesting. The cell phone sensors are much smaller. So the thing is, the smaller the sensor, the more the depth of field. My slide is not. Let me edit that. Yeah. I had it wrong. So you keep making the sensor smaller and smaller, and your depth of field gets better. So with cell phone sensors, for instance, you'll find that your typically your depth of field is much better than if you had like a full frame. You can't get a very shallow depth of field with a cell phone camera. Those sensors are relatively small. The interesting thing about, as a little, since the topic has come up, is the sheer numbers in which cell phones are sold, and the fact that the cell phone camera is a discriminating feature from a sales perspective for cell phones, that there's enormous numbers of research dollars being expended on making cell phone cameras good. The big camera guys like Nikon and even Canon just can't put that much effort into it, or there's just not that kind of volume to justify that. So there's all kinds of interesting stuff going on, and a lot of it in the software with the cell phones. So that's a whole, the way that whole, their constraints are also different. One is that since the cell phone is so thin, the distance between the the outside or the objective lens to the sensor is so small. It's a significant challenge, and the fact that they can do so much even with that is pretty amazing. So a friend had just sent me a little article that one of the things that cell phone camera folks are looking at, and it'll probably come out in the near future, is what they call a periscope lens. And the idea is simple. Normally you draw a line perpendicular to the plane of the sensor, and that is sort of also the axis for your lens, and you set your lens along that line. What they do with the periscope, and obviously if you do something like that, then the cell phone is not thick enough to do it for you. You can't get much in terms of lens elements or the number of sort of discrete glass pieces to compose your lens. So what they do instead is that you go along that perpendicular.
I got a light tube. You create a light tube to carry it.
Yeah, so you create like imagine you stick a periscope in front of the sensor. And now you can make that tube for the periscope go along the length of the cell phone. And so now you have more distance in which you can add more glass elements and do all kinds of funky stuff. So let's see what happens. There's all kinds of cool stuff.
It's the same as what I think when we had the discussion on binoculars. There were two kinds, right? One stuck the prism in, so it could change the direction of the light. But anyway, yeah, carry on.
Yeah, that's slightly different, but yeah, it's a similar idea. You come out from the lens, and then you go through a 45-degree. You make a 90-degree change in the direction of the light.
Yeah.
And now you can run along, and then again you make another 90-degree turn to go onto the sensor. So that gives you more. I mean, but there's still the fundamental challenge of like how much light can you gather. The opening for a camera there is quite small. Anyway,
True.
So the cell phone stuff is a whole separate beast. It's on a different trajectory than our SLR and other cameras. And also note that cell phones have basically eaten up the market for compact cameras. Pretty much that market has disappeared. So, and even the DSLRs and others are under pressure because of just the volume. Anyway, so I kind of wanted to make the point about the noise and also sort of highlight that you have the area, the number of pixels, and size of the pixel, and the three of them are related, obviously. There's a simple relationship, and it is the size of the individual pixel that determines the signal to noise ratio and correspondingly the low light performance and dynamic range. I'll have some references at the end, which people can look up for more details. But so that sort of concludes what I wanted to say about sensors. If there are no questions, and oh yeah, and I did mention the the BSI or the backside, what is it? What does I stand for? I forget now. So if you
illumination,
backside illumination, yeah, backside illumination. So if you think of CMOS or semiconductors, you can think of it as like a stack of things. So you start at the bottom with the silicon, and that's where the transistors are. And then on top of that, so there's the silicon and the poly, but they're like the lowest. And then above that, there is many layers of metal wiring or routing to connect these devices, which are the transistors, which are at the lowest level, right? So these many levels of metal provide the wiring basically to connect these devices. So in the sensors, when they were first made, the light would be directed from the size on which it is metallized, and it would have to go through the layers of routing to get to the substrate. And so some number of photons would not make it all the way through because there's metal wiring going around in between. So then there is a class of sensors where what they do is on the substrate side, which is the other side, they grind down the substrate to as close as they can get to the active portion, which is where the transistors are, and then let the light enter from that side. So this is from a manufacturing perspective, it's a more challenging process. But then what it does is now the light has nothing else impeding it. It just has to get through that size into there's no metal on that side. So Sony and I don't know who else, but I think I'm familiar with Sony having been doing this. And so even Nikon is sourcing some sensors from them. So the D850, for instance, uses a backside illuminated sensor. And going forward, they'll probably use more of those. So that so now going back to our earlier discussion, if more of the photons can actually get in there, that will help with the performance. Okay. All right, so I'm going to move into next into, I guess, birding and some wildlife, but I'm going to do it roughly at a very high level, break it down that way. An introduction before you go out and then in the field. So the obligatory code of ethics for birders and wildlife. It's great to go out and take pictures and interact or like be there and observe wildlife, but do it in a way that you don't affect the wildlife. That's primary. So for instance, I know over here, when people post pictures on Facebook or other media on groups, especially birding oriented groups or photography oriented groups, sometimes if they post pictures of nests, or they post pictures and they specify exact locations of some birds, such as say a burrowing owl. Burrowing owls are popular for whatever reason, for people to go and see them and to take pictures of them. And since they live on the ground and they live in burrows, people get too close to them and disturb them, and they end up leaving. Unlike birds that are on trees and who are relatively a little bit more, I guess, immune to that. So their posts will get taken down, and people will frown on that. So this is, all of us want to go out. We want to be able to do these things, and I'm sure we are all careful about this. So before going out, okay. So especially with birding, and again, it'll probably differ depending on which part of the world we are in. But the idea is that we should look at our local um, calendar, so to speak, for birds and wildlife in general, right? So when you look at a breeder, then when do they arrive, and breeding and nesting time, rearing, and they leave, and then they move. Typically in winter, they go closer to the tropics. So I'm very lucky, for instance, on the west coast of the US here. I live along what is called the Pacific Flyway. So the Pacific Flyway is the main migration route for birds from the Arctic, Alaska and other parts of the Arctic, to go down towards the tropics. So right now the season is kind of just started. So I'll show you some pictures later. We get, especially in this area, in the San Francisco Bay Area and Sacramento area, this area used to be, because it's in the delta of the Sacramento River, this whole area used to be very marshy like 200-300 years ago. And so shorebirds and waterfowl would stop here in enormous numbers during their southward migration, and even sort of stay here, be resident here during the winter. Over the years, once especially the Europeans arrived, they converted a lot of that delta into farmland. And now we are left with just pockets of that marshland, which is now protected and which serves as a migration stopover for the birds. So I typically go out there during the winter a few times to see that. And so even now I will see flocks of thousands, tens of thousands of birds, like enormous numbers. And I can only imagine what it must have been a few hundred years ago, with on the scale on which it would have been. And there are very few records, but whatever is there is pretty amazing. I mean, there are birds in the millions, like literally. And even now, when a whole flock takes off, and it can literally cover the sky, so it's pretty impressive. So there's the breeders, then there are the wintering birds, and these are sort of what things you're looking for. Similar, the migrant which are passing through, and the residents. And there's like a group that typically doesn't migrate, some species which are always local. Okay.
Raminder, when you're referring to south and north, I mean, this slide is particular to the area, I guess, right?
Yeah, so I mean, you have to look at where you are. And, this is also northern hemisphere. So southern hemisphere will flip things around, right? And the patterns there will be quite different, I think. I mean, again, the landmass in the south is very, very different from in the north. And so the patterns
Not just that, what I meant was probably makes a big difference between Southern California to Canada also, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, so there's, so this is local, right? So that's why it's kept sort of general without talking about which birds or without talking about anything like that, right? You have to look at your own area, maybe check with your Audubon Society or some of the birding books to get a sense. And okay, so I'll come here. So I think this is sort of just at a very high level, what to expect. That depending on where you live, depending on the time of year, depending on how bad or mild the winters are and things like that, all of these things will impact what you get to see. So resources for finding birds. Are folks familiar with ebird.org?
Some of us are. I am familiar. I think some more might be.
Okay. So I'll be curious what happens. Can people see the screen when I click through it? Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a website where you can go and get. So how do I begin to describe this? You can let's say, okay, you can get an account on this website. It's free, and then you can get an app for your cell phone. And so typically how I do it is that there are a couple of different ways it gets used, right? One is if you go birding, you can turn on the app, and then the app will, based on your location and time of year, it'll present you with a list of birds that you would likely to see in that area. And then as you go observing, you keep checking off what you've seen and how many of them you've seen and things like that. And then at the end, you can submit that list and it goes into the database. And so now imagine like hundreds and thousands and millions of people doing that. And you can then go back and query that database, right? You can look for hotspots. You can look and see like what was seen in this location by birders in the last week, in the last month, in the last year, and so forth. And they also give you like historical trends, like when do sightings of some birds increase in certain months and then go down in other months and things like that. So this is a great resource, in one sense as part of citizen science, and then also as a resource for birders to go look for things. So I highly recommend folks using it and even contributing to it. Right. So if you submit your bird lists, that just is great. And a few years ago, so sometimes I go visit birding festivals, and so at one of the birding festivals, the Cornell ornithology lab folks were there. And they are the folks behind another very nice app called Merlin, MERLIN, which is another free app that you can use for your phone. And it's a great app for identifying birds and exploring birds. So, they'll ask you like 5 simple questions, like what is the location you're at? What is the size of the bird you've seen? What are the colors? Like, list 3 colors that you observe on the bird, and like some question on the behavior of the bird, like is it like in a tree, is it on the ground, is it wading, it is swimming, or something like that. And then it'll present you with a list of choices, and it's actually pretty amazing how well it works. And what they were talking about was that they had initially started out supporting the Americas, North America and South America. But they found they were commenting that the next area that they were going to focus on was India, because the amount of contribution that eBird was seeing in India was growing at such a rapid rate that they were then diverting their resources to support that. So, which is actually, I found that very, very, very refreshing that, folks, there's so much interest in, yes, in our undergrad.
Raminder?
Sorry?
Can I pitch in a bit here?
Yeah, sure.
So there are almost Bangalore, Mysore, Delhi, Northeast, Orissa. There are contributions from lots of places, and from ages like from 6 to 70. Kids from 6 to 70 are contributing to eBird. And the next item that you're saying, Facebook groups, there are a couple of Facebook groups in India that are really prolific and really, really helpful.
So firstly, even when I'm sure the experience for many people, when you first leave India and you go to, like, especially you come to North America or some of these places, you noticed instantly the sheer lack of birds. Initially it feels like there aren't any birds here compared to like what you're used to in India. And so No, it's great. It's great to see that kind of interest. And I've been on trips in India, for wildlife and birding, and it's always been pretty amazing. Okay, so moving on. Yes. So when does one go look for? When's a good time to go do this stuff, right? So for a number of reasons, mornings and evenings come up again, right? So whether in landscape photography, in other kinds, in terms of the light available at that time, right? There's good reasons to go out at that time. The other piece is that birds and wildlife are active during these times. So sometimes to get the best, you would have to get up at pretty early hours. But so that's one piece. The other is, and also this is for those folks who are along the coast where there are shorebirds, you will find that as the tide recedes and it exposes, as the water moves down and exposes more of the land, the birds will follow that edge, trying to catch organisms that haven't yet taken cover or managed to get away once the water has receded. And so the last couple of hours before low tide is a good time to go out and see, for shorebirds. So you can look at the tide tables and do that. So
Raminder, could I just add a little bit here? So
yeah, please.
Yeah, so a lot of guys here in Mumbai, go for photographing flamingos.
Okay, yes.
And it works exactly the other way there. So
Okay.
when the tide is coming in, the birds feed on the algae. So
Right.
so they come closer and closer to the shore. The only problem is couple of hours before the actual high tide, they are so close to humans that they just fly away. So that's so in case you wish to photograph flamingos, especially in Mumbai, consult that the tide table and maybe go there about 3 to 4 hours before the high tide time. So just a bit about flamingos. Thanks, Raminder.
Thank you. I'm just adding it real time. Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. So I'm just going to quickly jump into, and so for instance, like here's a very early morning picture, right? And you see, so you can get some very the same picture like a couple of hours later will be very bland and meh. It'll be like, yeah. So this is what you will get early in the morning, right? So going along further, obviously the usual stuff. Get comfortable with your changing your camera controls. One of my most common problems or mistakes is that like my camera is still at the settings of whatever I was doing last time. And now I'm in a different situation and I happily start taking pictures again and like it's all messed up. Initializing, depending on what you're going to be shooting, what time of day you're going to be doing it, just spend a couple of minutes making sure your camera is in the right state and your battery is there. Like it's a simple dumb thing, and I still sometimes, more often than I would like, mess that up.
So can you spell out 1 or 2 controls that you think are the most common ones that get messed up from one setting to the other?
Oh boy.
The reason I'm saying that is because I think a lot of the audience would be wondering, what are these camera controls that one has to change? I mean, after all, I just set shutter exposure and all that, I'm done. So why am I so bothered about this?
Oh boy, yeah. So there could be like, it could be your ISO settings. It could be what else? Feel free to chime in, Raghu, Kiran, others.
Yeah, ISO was the one that came to my mind because you definitely use different ISO to start off with until you adjust on the field. But
Right.
ISO ranges for one activity is very different from the other.
Right. And sometimes I use, the newer cameras have this feature where you can either set a fixed ISO, or you can have auto ISO with a variable range you specify. You specify on the one hand the minimum shutter speed you want, and on the other side you specify the maximum ISO that you want the camera to use, right? And then based on the condition, you allow the camera will calculate and move around, right?
So even though it is aperture priority,
Yes.
you actually have two variables that the camera can decide on instead of you deciding two variables and the camera deciding the third.
Right. So, often like I will set that range based on what I'm doing, and that range is off, like when I go, for instance. So yeah, it's sort of like number of things like that, small things, but they have a big impact on your picture. So that's.
I will also add that very often when you're traveling, you don't keep your camera ready for shooting. You go there and then take out. But I think one lesson I learned, I missed a wonderful rainbow shot that you should be all set to shoot the moment you step out of your house.
Yeah. I think that's very good advice. Because you don't know. I mean, you have to be ready for the opportunity.
Yes.
And that's.
So do you then carry two cameras, one for, because in that example, the rainbow versus the bird, even the lens size and the settings would be so different.
Well, that day anyway, we were not going for birding. We were actually going for landscape. So we were going to Tamini and we were trying to shoot waterfalls. So the same lens would have worked. But I mean, two of us were going and both of us were dumb enough not to have it all set up. And as we were driving in, we could see the rainbow. It was light drizzle and we stopped, tried to take out, and within seconds, the rainbow was gone.
Yeah, that's.
But Raghu, in general, it is a good idea to have two bodies, right? With two.
Yeah.
One having a telephoto lens and one with a kind of a wide angle.
But the vast majority that are listening in will start wondering, am I in the right crowd?
No, but I'm actually very thankful for that comment because I spent 3 months justifying I needed to carry two bodies and bought one. So,
so in case you are looking for votes, then I would in fact say carry three bodies, and I'll support you in case there is a.
So one gentleman in the crowd had commented, "Oh my God, you guys are talking of carrying 10 kilograms. So, you're trying to put him off."
Yeah. So I've actually steered clear of that kind of discussion in my presentation. But, for full disclosure, I carry a full frame and an APS-C. And then I put a long lens on the APS-C to give me a little boost in terms of reach, and use that as my handheld birding setup. And then I also have a full frame setup, which then probably ends up using the tripod. It's a different.
Perfect. That's so great to hear. That's what I ended up mimicking right now with Sony A7 and 6600. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah. So I mean, there is no. All this is like, go out, try out, see what works for you, what fits your style, and like it's this is all very subjective stuff, and you should experiment. So again, for birding, this is at a high level. This is some of the stuff that I do. I use continuous focusing. So I think in Nikon it's called AFC, and in Canon it's AI servo. Maybe my terminology is off a little bit. These things sometimes change over time.
Actually,
in
there
terms
is correspond AI servo, I think, is also tracking, right?
AI
Yeah,
servo, so AI servo is actually continuous focusing. What Raminder has mentioned is correct, but it will also try to track. But the older cameras, it's the focus tracking is not really good. So the newer ones are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for the rest of the audience who are listening in, the difference is tracking means that once you lock the subject, as the subject moves, the focus tracks. Focus is not on the original position, it moves with the subject. And on the Nikon, you have a tracking mode called it's called AFA. So you have an area mode tracking.
Yeah.
You do have continuous, but you also have an area mode.
Area mode. Yeah. So basically, if you think of the sensor, they have you can use different parts of the sensor depending on where the object is of interest, to use those elements on the sensor for focusing. They have a certain number of elements on the sensor are used for focusing. Okay, in DSLRs, there are fewer of them compared to mirrorless. Mirrorless has better coverage. That's a whole separate thing that we probably don't want to go into right now. But the second bullet I have here is like a single autofocus point, which is basically the center of the sensor or of your viewing field. It typically tends to be the one that's the optimized the most by design, and it focuses the fastest and also the most accurate. And I use the single point. I program on my DSLR. I use back button focus. So I separate the shutter button, the focus operation from the shutter release button. So normally when the camera comes from the factory and you start using it, as you press the shutter release button, halfway through it will focus, and then as you keep pressing it further, it will then take the picture. So you can do a half press to kind of focus the shot. And I should have made a slide or two about that, but I wasn't planning to talk about it. But in most DSLRs, you have the option of programming and selecting an operation from a set of operations to assign to different buttons. They have some extra buttons, or to change the meaning of some buttons. So one of them is the one that I use really is back button focus. So I use the the button at the back of the camera to focus. And by separating it, one nice thing you can do is that you can frame you can focus on the object you want. And then once the focus is set, you can release the focus button and compose your shot and then take the picture. It's a matter of something that you just get used to doing, and whether you do it back button focus or you don't, this is again a subjective thing. You can make some kind of arguments about why one is better than the other, but fundamentally it comes down to what works for you.
So does the metering that Raghu was talking about earlier, does that happen at the same time that you do the back button focus?
So the metering happens, I believe, at the time you click. So for instance, I might, when I recompose the shot, the metering is likely to change.
So,
I mean, it's going to change anyway, because
Raminder, could I just one small point. This, the back button focusing is very useful when you are using shutter priority, aperture priority, or the program mode.
Yeah.
If you're using manual,
yeah,
if you go completely manual, then obviously you
doesn't
focus first, recompose, and click, because your metering is done by you, not by the camera. So
right.
So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, that good point. I mean, in manual things change because you're setting everything the way you want it. And yeah, to Mukul's point, like I think yes, you will. The metering will change because the moment you recompose, what is coming onto the sensor is changing. So it's going to, the metering is it's going to change. So the other thing I do is, I assign a different focus mode to another button, which is a group area focus. So which is what Raghu was talking about earlier, which includes tracking. And so just with my thumb, I can go between those two buttons. They're close to each other on the back side of the camera. And if there's a bird in flight, I switch to the other mode, which is the group area focus, by just shifting my thumb like half an inch or whatever. And I can then take a picture with that. And when the bird is sitting down, it's on a tree or on a branch or somewhere, then I go back to the center autofocus. That's just the way I do it. But
this is very useful for those who are actually using the equipment already, because it does help to focus rapidly. Otherwise, through a long telephoto lens, getting focuses of moving birds is hard.
Yeah. So I find the group area focus in Nikon to work, reasonably well. Shutter priority. I put shutter priority, but I've also been known to use aperture priority. I kind of go back and forth between them. Again, there are pros and cons of that. Then with birds in flight, or if I'm expecting some action, then I end up making sure that I'm using the high-speed drive, or even the low-speed or high-speed drive. I'm not in single shot mode. So what that means is that when I press the button, the camera just keeps taking pictures. It doesn't just take one and stop.
And what
that
per second is it?
I'm sorry?
What FPS do you use? What frames per second do you work with?
Oh, so I don't have that much control over it. There is like a low frame rate and a high frame rate, and that depends on the camera model.
Okay.
The high frame rates on the cameras that I have go up to like 14 or so per second, and the low frame rates are like anywhere between 7 to 10 per second. So this is useful when you have, and I'll show you some examples of this as we go along, as how it works out, because you have to sort of anticipate that some interesting things are going to happen, and you get set for it. And then I set up my ISO sensitivity, like I mentioned earlier, depending on the conditions. I also do exposure compensation down by like a third of a stop, or like maybe 2/3 of a stop. So nowadays the camera sensors are quite sensitive, and they have pretty good dynamic range, the newer ones especially. And anything in the last, new means like anything in the last 5 to 10 years, typically, maybe not 10, but definitely 5 years. There's sensitivity is pretty high. Their dynamic range is gone. Some of the cameras I have, like the dynamic range is like 14 bits. So that's a lot of detail it can capture. So then I set my exposure compensation to like minus a third of a stop or like minus 2/3 of a stop. So I'm effectively underexposing. And what I'm doing is that I'm buying myself some shutter speed. And then I fix it in. So by underexposing, I'm saying that the camera, the metering that you are doing to calculate the exposure, I want you to derate that by a certain amount. And so then the camera will say, okay, fine. Like if I derate that, then if the aperture remains the same, then I'm going to make my shutter speed faster, right?
Yeah.
And so especially when you're trying to shoot anything in motion, then that extra shutter speed is always good to have. And I can recover those details in post because that information is already there. The dynamic range is good enough to capture that. And I think we've never talked about, have we talked about the histogram? So that's another, like maybe I can cover that another time, but so that's the other piece of it. You know, it's playing around with that by doing this sort of thing.
Yeah, we haven't talked about histogram, and I was going to get Vivek Ghosh to talk about digital darkroom and talk about histograms and all that.
Yeah. So exactly, because this is related to that sort of stuff. Like I'm going to recover it in post, so that'll be good. Okay. So now moving into so now I'm changing the format of like how I do things. So and let's see how this works. So I'm just gonna let's just go through. So what makes an interesting photo? So like this is for me it was on that trip, like this is the first time I was seeing this bird, but I was very thrilled to see this bird. It's a rough-legged hawk and it's found in open areas, but it's not that often seen. It's kind of it doesn't come close to where humans are a lot. So and then there's another picture. This is a bald eagle in flight. Here's another picture. Now this is a juvenile bald eagle.
Birds mainly, but wildlife and wildlife.
Okay. So here's another.
Arctic and the birds south ilke pone migration path la tamaskin.
Hey, can somebody turn off their
when they are going
can you please mute Pratap? Can you mute please?
at his place.
Pratap, can you mute?
Okay.
Ida Jindalo.
Hey Pratap, can you mute?
Raminder, I think as a host, you can put him on mute.
Yeah, you can put him on mute.
Yeah, I think he's already. Did he go on mute?
No, he's not.
What happened?
So can you bring up the participants list and you can mute him, Raminder?
Okay, so for whatever reason,
It's at the bottom, typically at the bottom.
Yeah, but
yeah, he must be in the screen sharing mode. There, I think you'll have to get out of the screen sharing mode to do that.
Okay, let me just try and reach him.
I can do it. Okay, mute. Okay.
You carry on, Raminder.
Yeah, I muted him.
Okay, great.
So let me find my presentation. Okay.
No.
Raminder is not muted as yet.
Bye.
Oh, I thought I muted him. Okay, it's well. What did it do? Yeah, it says it's muted now.
Yes, now he's muted.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
he buys beer at the next meeting. Let him know.
Yeah. Okay. So, and then this is a picture of a juvenile bald eagle. And you can see it's kind of a very, it may not be very suitable for, not everybody might like seeing it, but when you go out and shoot pictures and you look at stuff, you're going to see things like this. And it is carrying the remains of prey. So it's basically the skull and the spine of a waterfowl. And it was kind of interesting to see this juvenile kind of carry it around like a trophy. And it would not let go of it. I mean, there's nothing there for it to eat or anything, but it was just like carrying it around and saying, yeah, I've got this thing with me. And like, it was quite an interesting sight to see. And then here's another picture. Now this was taken at like an extremely early hour. So, the light was very, very poor. So basically all I got was silhouette, but it captures a lot. If you can see, it's sort of on the right-hand top. There's one eagle which is got a waterfowl and it's kind of holding it in its talons. And then there's another eagle trying to steal it from it, right? So if you go back and look at this picture, this is a nice picture. Things are sharp and you can see everything and it's very nice. And then you can progress through these things. And this final picture is actually my favorite picture of these pictures, because to me, it's also about like what is happening, what the story is, what you're seeing over here, right?
Raminder, there's so much drama in this picture. Fabulous.
Exactly, right? So what is it that, when you go out there, what are you looking for? What are you trying to see, right? I mean, we can take a very nice picture and we can get this, but the last two are also telling a story, or there is drama, there is some tension. And in surprisingly, I was upset about the light in this picture, but then considering the nature of the subject and sort of the starkness of the picture and the starkness of what is happening kind of go well together for me. And so it's what do you think of what so like I just put a slide there. So you said there's a lot of drama in this picture. So what goes through your mind? What makes you think that, what is it that you're looking for when you're taking the picture, and what are you hoping you would capture? And something like this is always, it makes you feel good, or it's a good feeling to have observed or seen or actually this sort of thing in real life, because it is real life in a way, which is it occurs for a fleeting moment and then it's gone, and you have a record of it. So I want to sort of encourage that kind of thinking as I go through this. Here's another shot. Now this is a perfectly nice picture. It's like, there's a guanaco and a calf, and they're running, and it is what it is. It's not necessarily a great composition or anything, but it's a decent picture. Then there is this one. So these guys actually ran by us like just a few meters from us, and they were like running all out. You can see actually in this picture, all 8 legs are in the air. Like there's nothing is touching the ground right now. And you can also, I think, if you should be able to see that this guy is breathing so hard that it's literally spitting. You can see the droplets in the air in front of its mouth. right? The interesting thing, and you can go look up. You can go look up in online. Okay. You can go look up online like how they the male target their rivals.
Supriya, could you press mute?
One sec. Let me see if I can. Okay. So this is again the time of year when they're forming their harems, and so this male was getting close, so it was being chased away, and the guy behind is trying to get through his legs to bite off his, literally. So if you go look up what is happening, if you look at if you go online and check how they behave, it's basically attempting to sort of incapacitate its rival's ability to reproduce at all in the future. And so that's a pretty dramatic, and this guy is like sort of literally running for his life here. And there's also this, there's a lone Wanako in sort of this very desolate landscape and sky, right? So again, sort of, the idea I'm trying to get across, or like, is like when you're doing this thing, is it, what are we, there's drama, there is action, there is this picture is moody in a way. For me, it captured what that place was like. This was in a very, very desolate area, and it captured the loneliness of that place. I mean, there's nothing there.
I want to take listeners to the first presentation that I made, and I gave some examples. This is a perfect example of less is more, and having good foreground and having clutter-free background, right? So you can see the picture is just outstanding.
So I actually liked it and I enlarged it. so I obviously I'm leading up, I'm sort of in a very, very obvious way leading up to a few things. And so to talk of, drama, talking about mood, going, so, we talk birds, right? So, and then this is not just birds. I mean, it applies to even other animals. So courtship or breeding season is a fabulous time to be out there looking, because there is all kinds of interesting behavior going on, right? So here, these birds are some of my favorite birds, and this is the family of grebes. So here they literally run on the water. They pair off and they run on the water to sort of establish pairs. And then once they have done this a few times, they do another ceremony. It's called the weed ceremony. And they go up and they go underwater, they get weeds, then they come up to the top and then they exchange it with each other. And that's called the weed ceremony. And if these two things go fine, then they start nest building, and then they will mate, and then they will have, babies. So another aspect of the breeding season is that the plumage and the colors and the feathers that they put on during that time is outstanding. It's just amazing. So I've just given an example. During the rest of the year, this bird is a gray and white looking very nondescript bird. But during the breeding season, it just undergoes a complete transformation. Right? So this is the eared grebe. Then it can get competitive. So these are your regular snowy egrets, and you just have to be ready for something happening, and which goes back to being ready with your camera and everything when you're out there, because sometimes these things will last for just barely a couple of seconds. Right.
So Raminder, they are fighting, or it is more like a mating ballet?
It's a good question. I think this was, having seen the whole sequence of events that happened, these are rivals. So basically there were two of them earlier at one point. And so I'm guessing, in retrospect now, I'm guessing that one of them was a female and the other was a male. And then the interloper, the third guy, showed up. And suddenly these two guys went at each other, whereas the third one, it just sat there like very peacefully, like not involved and they were all right next to each other.
Oh.
But these two were at each other. So that's my takeaway from it, was that there was one female and then there were these two guys.
Okay.
But Raminder, one question for you. These, as you said, they happen within a fraction of a second or 2 seconds or something like that. How do you anticipate and stay focused on them? Are you already focused, or you see it happening and suddenly swivel around and then focus on it? What happens?
That's all opportunistic, right? Like, I mean, if you're looking at it, like, and then, after some time, like, if you see that normally when you see these guys, you don't see the feathers on their head raised like that. For instance, those feathers are all laid back nicely into a nice round smooth head. But even if you see one of them walking around with its feathers standing up, you know that it's in an aggressive mood or a mode. And should another bird come by, it's going to react aggressively to it. So there will be cues, there will be signs like that you can pick up on and then be prepared. And they will repeat it. Like, if something happens, and then one of them will fly off, but it's quite likely that some other bird might come later. So some amount of patience also pays dividends here. But there will be cues, especially during the season. But there's a big element of opportunism also in it. So there's also drama or spectacle in just numbers. So for instance, so Kiran and others who have gone to Africa, like when you think of the Great Migration, that's an example, right? The sheer numbers and that whole story there's drama in that. So similarly, you can have, so this is what I was talking about, like you will see this like whole flocks of birds just rise up all at the same time, and it's this mass of birds. Now you can do this in many different ways, and there are like some of these things, they don't fit on your camera, they're like just all around you. Excuse me. And it goes on. I mean, it could be it's even dolphins, like when they stampede. So here I was on a boat, and in the middle of a stampede of like a few thousand dolphins like this all around me, just running or just flying literally. So they anything with motion and numbers, it makes for a great shot or great story. Then there is hunting, or around food. So this is a merlin, it's one of the falcons, and so they hunt on the wing. So peregrine falcons, merlins, they catch other birds in flight. And I've tried to take a picture, but never been successful of a falcon in a dive. I mean, it just, like, I see it and then it's gone. Like I can't track it, and it just moves so fast. And then the next time I see it is when it's kind of leveled off again. But one day maybe I'll get it.
Absolutely, we will.
This might be, I mean, this was also a sort of a unique experience, but these are orcas or killer whales predating on a gray whale calf. And, you know, they literally take turns slamming it and then incapacitating it and then trying to prevent it from surfacing to breathe, and literally just drowning it. Because even the gray whale calf is huge in size compared to them. I mean, it's comparable in size to them or bigger. So just the sheer physicality of it. Here, you know, you can see the orca on the right is literally, and you can see the open mouth of the gray whale. It's literally sort of slamming it. It's kind of turned it over and it's kind of pushing it down with its body weight. Right. So, you know, hunting or eating is a big. So
Raminder, just one quick question before you proceed further. So in the couple of photographs that you just showed, it's obvious that there seems to be a sequence. So when do you decide not to take a video and just take some photographs in sequence? I mean, just take some photographs and not a video.
Yeah, so I very rarely take videos, and partly for that reason, because I don't know how to decide to go back and forth. Literally, it's like if I choose to do a video, what am I giving up? And if I choose not to do a video, what am I giving up? And it's something that I have not really explored, and I have not really done videos. And I think partly also because I think I will need a slightly different setup. I will need a more I mean, taking a picture, I need to stabilize the camera for just like a fraction of a second. Taking a video, to do a decent job, I have to stabilize it for a longer period of time. And I would probably need some additional equipment. I mean, I have a picture, I wasn't prepared for this. Like, so there's sometimes on the boat that I go, there are these people who come. And so this guy had a full body harness. Like he was holding, he had this whole thing he had strapped on to his body, and then he had this arm on it in front, and he had this sort of stabilized setup. And then I think he had the Canon Red or one of those fancy video cameras, and he was holding it. And remember, you're also on a boat, which is constantly moving around. And he was, I mean, he had this like massive setup. I don't know. I have a hard enough time taking still pictures on a moving boat. It would be challenging. I mean, on land, to be honest, I have not really explored video.
Raminder, Pratap here. These shots are single shots, or are you taking a few shots, multi shots, and then choosing the best frame or something?
It is in birds in flight, definitely multi shots. For some of the slower moving things, I control the shooting.
Okay.
So, you know, showing those pictures, I was sort of leading up to this slide, right? So, you know, you have a picture or a set of pictures that tell a story or a little snippet. It captures a mood, or it appeals to some sort of aesthetics, and I'll get to that a little bit. And with birds and wildlife, you know, something sort of very elemental, or something very, very visceral or very basic or very, back to nature kind of thing. Like for instance, that the juvenile bald eagle carrying that skull and spinal cord of that thing around with it. I mean, there's something very elemental about that. And so the common theme is, all of them have to do something to feed themselves. They have to get water to drink. They all have the urge to procreate. And from an aesthetics or from a bigger or mood or bigger perspective, there's also the environment in which they exist. So all of these actually help you create, are sort of elements of a memorable picture. So going next. So again, now I'm going to go into sort of the, when you get lemons, you try to make lemonade kind of thing. So the lighting is pretty awful in this picture, but these birds were sort of putting on a like interesting show and behavior, and I got a sort of nice conjunction of them, or a nice I guess positioning of them that I liked, and so the background got cleaned up. Here's another one which I like a lot actually, and here this was in the middle of the afternoon or late afternoon. The sun was going down directly in front of me. So it's like the worst possible thing that you could have. The sun's coming straight to the camera. But then there's this water in front of me and the sun's hitting that water. And it just created this sort of dazzling light on the water. Yeah, there is a bird, but all you can see is its outline, but it's the rest of it. So this is like sort of an example of, yeah, I mean, you got lemons, but you try to make lemonade with it. And, there's an aesthetic appeal to it. So, you stumble upon this sometimes serendipitously, and then you say, there is this thing also you can explore. And so then now that when I go on the water or I'm near water, even in bad light, when I can't take pictures of other things, I mess around and play around with these sort of things. And just on the surface of water with light, and maybe there are some impurities, maybe there's a little bit of oil, or maybe there is some algae, maybe there is something else. And then the light, water, and those things just create all kinds of things that are memorable in some way. And just, even if nothing, but just if they're abstract, but it helps sometimes, when you're out there, you're like taking pictures, you have dead time, and in which nothing is happening. So that's when your mind, you start wandering and exploring these other things. So this is another example of that. This is sometimes on the boat when you're out there. What I do is I turn my camera shutter speed up very high. So that's why this picture is very dark. And then I go to the back of the boat and I take pictures of the wake that is created by the boat. So the boat, as it's moving through, creates this sort of wake of waves moving away at the back. And the tops of those waves will break. And they break in very interesting fashion and shape. So the idea here was like I was trying to freeze it with a very high shutter speed, and you get all kinds of fascinating shapes. And again, it's not directly related, but it's part of the experience or of being out there and doing things and exploring and messing around.
Very good tips, Raminder, because often you are going there and then you are not getting anything good, you think. But these are all the things that finally you can also capture, right? So
Yeah.
really good tips.
I mean, and there's no end to it. Like, I mean, you try to keep an open mind, and like, like I said earlier, like sometimes I didn't plan to do this. Like I was just messing around. I just tried, and then like you look at the result and you go like, okay, this is actually worth looking into, or like trying out. So always try out. There is nothing dumb. There is nothing silly. There's nothing stupid. you never know what you're going to find, right? So bad light can still result in aesthetically pleasing outcomes. I mean, it's just what you do with it. Here's another set of things so play. Animals will play. Birds will play. They will do things for fun. So here, this is a resource dolphin, and they like the tactile feeling of messing around with seaweed and running it over their body. So they will try to wrap around it. They will pick it up and throw it. They will. So, and it's always fun to watch an animal or a bird or doing something fun. You feel like, they're actually enjoying this, like they're playing, they're doing this sort of thing. Another thing is family. Rearing, child rearing. This is again the same bird that was running. This is a grebe. So they're completely waterbound. So even when their babies are born, they actually carry them on their backs. And the pair is very, very, very attached. So the individual in the pair who is a better fisher will actually catch fish and bring. And so it's not the roles are not set by gender. The roles are apparently set by who's more capable. So it's a much more pragmatic apportioning of roles in this. So you learn all these sort of things also about wildlife, and you realize that in nature there are so many different ways of doing things. And so sometimes it's the female who's the better fisher, and she will be the one fishing, and the male will carry the babies, and sometimes it's the other way around. Here's another one. So this was a mother and calf. So the mother is in the foreground and the calf is in the behind her. And whatever the mother did, the calf would try to repeat. So it was just like a joyful experience to watch. And I just like the juxtapositioning of the two tails this way. But so there's behavior. So there's all kinds of behavior. So whether it's child rearing, whether it's play, whether it's learning, birds and animals are doing that all the time. Then, again, this goes back to family and rearing. This calf is like just 3 or 4 days old. It's still not completely lost the pink color. And we sat and watched them for like a half an hour, just the two of them interacting. And I kid you not, that for the entire duration, they never actually broke touch. They were always in physical contact with each other. I mean, the mother always knew where it was. She was her legs or body was either in contact with it or her trunk. And likewise, and to me in this picture, just the expressions on the faces. I mean, it's very expressive to me, and very emotionally expressive to me. So you look for this sort of stuff, and elephants are amazing at this. Then there is more. This is again playful behavior, and it comes in a nice play of light and water also along with it. So the sky was blue, so that helped. It was clear skies. So this is a orca which is kind of doing a backstroke. It was just messing around. It was like on its back and just playing around. Yeah, I'm going to try to wrap it up quickly. So bad or overcast conditions. Sometimes, like, you may not want to go out when it might rain or it's overcast, but I'm going to try to argue that, there are certain benefits to that. So if you look at this picture, the birds and the colors on the birds are nicely exposed. And the sky in the background is gray, if not, dark gray, I would say. Now, under normal circumstances, what would have happened is that sky would have been very bright. And if that was very bright, that would have made taking a picture like this very hard, if not impossible. I mean, you would not get the exposure on the birds, which would come anywhere close to this. And that is basically allowed because the sky has turned off and it's not this bright expanse. So there are some more examples of that. And in here, what happened, there was a band in the clouds. So there is a band on the ground that got lit up with a little bit more light, and the rest of it stayed in the shadow of the cloud. So you can get some very interesting, nice effects in terms of the light. And light is all that matters. Like literally in pictures, you getting good light makes the picture for you. And then sort of like talking about animals in their environment. As much as it is nice to get an animal which is free of obstructions and you get a clear view of it, there is also something about having an animal sitting in sort of trying to camouflage itself or sitting in its environment and operating from there, in the sense like it's keeping an eye on some other animals that it might decide to attack at some point, but it is using this position as its vantage point. So this is a similar one. Again, there is something sort of slightly scary and menacing about this picture, the way it is sort of, the way she is looking from behind cover. That's another one. Okay, another slide on sort of a little bit of technique in terms of getting sharp images. So I think we've covered some of it. You want high shutter speed. It can, 800 is probably a lower end of it, very low. You probably want to go up to 2000 or more, anywhere between 1600, 2000. Some mechanism for stabilizing if you have a tripod, monopod, or hold your breath while you're, and then when you press the shutter release, kind of like squeeze it instead of pushing it down. And then tuck your elbow, the upper arm that is holding the lens, tuck that against your body and hold your breath. And then the other thing is to, when you're shooting, and this is again going back to the question that was about shooting continuously, try to shoot in short bursts, and instead of like holding it down for an extended period of time, because what happens is that in most of the cameras, it won't reacquire focus in between frames once the burst starts. So by letting go and pressing it again after a few shots, you're giving the camera a chance to reacquire focus. And then of course, try to maximize the number of pixels on the bird, which basically try to fill the frame. So again, now this goes back to the burst mode thing. Like this is an example of where the burst mode, when I took this sequence, I had no idea. It's only when I went and looked at it later, because it happened so quickly. So here the kite has caught a vole, which it is holding athwart, so that it's kind of like the spinal cord of the bird and the spinal cord of the vole are at right angles to each other, right? Like it's across its body. And maybe that's how it caught it, but it's not a convenient way for it to hold it. So then it progresses, it lets go of one with one leg, and then it rearranges how it is holding it. And so now it's holding it so that their spinal cords are parallel. And then it tucks it into its body and takes off, right? And this whole thing happened within a second, right? So that's like the kind of thing that burst mode will get you. And it's quite amazing to see that. And here's another example. And you will also see what the trade-off is like. Sometimes the focusing isn't is the best. So here, there's a tern which has caught a fish, you can see, but it's barely got a grip on the fish. It's like it's got a bit of its tail in its mouth, but the rest of the fish is out, which is giving the fish a lot of leverage to swing around and get out of the beak. And it does that. It manages to break free. Now the bird can control itself in the air, but the fish has no control. So poor thing, it's just hoping that it can fall fast. But unfortunately, the bird dives again and grabs it in midair and catches it. So now this picture is slightly out of focus, but then this is the sort of thing that you can get.
Oh my God. This is
Right.
amazing.
Yeah,
so-
that is awesome. That's so cool.
And so, and these things happen so quickly. It's when you take a still pictures, you can actually freeze it in time, and then you can actually see it happening. So a little bit of field craft for going out, don't wear bright colors. You don't have to wear camouflage, but just wear some simple colors, drab colors, pastel shades, grays. Maintain silence. You can talk softly, not loudly. Move low, move slow. Especially if you're near a bird, take only a few steps at a time. Don't make sudden motions. If the bird animal looks at you, stop. Avoid eye contact. Eye contact is usually is a sign of aggression. A predator would look at you and make eye contact. A prey would avoid it. Or even among social animals, eye contact is taken as a threat. And so even like when an inferior ranking member approaches a higher ranking member, they will look down and approach. So act like that. Use blinds if you can. Sun and wind on your back. So I'll give you an example of that. Get down to the level of the bird and animal if safe and possible. And then, of course, if you know behavior, then you can anticipate. And that's a whole subject. And so, you get to learn about the animal, you get to learn about the bird, you'll get to learn about their behaviors. You can then start seeing patterns. And then once you start getting to that point, then you can start setting up and start anticipating. And then that will get you kinds of shots that you would not otherwise be able to. So this is an example of wind and sun on your back. So I'm facing these birds, and the wind is blowing from me to them. And also the sun is behind me, so the light is on them. So when they're coming into wind, so they're coming directly, so which makes for a great shot like this. And also the light is right on them. And then that also allowed me to capture one of them landing. And then you can see its feet are hitting the ground and you get a splash of water. But also it turned its wings to break. And so the tips of the wing are kind of like flipping over because of the air pressure. But it's basically now turned its wings from generating lift to braking. So that, and again, the light and the wind allowed it to happen. This is an example of this was in a lagoon near the beach. So I was able to lie down on the sand and literally take it get eye level with the bird. And that changes the perspective and how it looks. Long lens technique. Even if you have a tripod with a long lens, you'll still get shake. And the longer the lens, the more sensitive it gets to shake, because it just takes a little bit of motion to translate into a big motion at the end, at wherever the subject is. So the thing is, it's on the tripod. You put one hand on the lens and weigh it down a little. And then when you're looking through the eyepiece, jam your head against the camera. And so between your hand, the tripod, and your head holding the camera, you're kind of stabilizing it even more. And so that helps you get more
So
clear.
Raminder, on interruption here, one quick question. Is the hand better at the end of the lens or above the mount?
Yeah. So I think, it depends on the lens and the weight distribution of the lens. So if it's a front heavy lens, or if it is, so I think you probably want it to be where you can try out experiment, but I think you want it to be where the weight of the lens is.
Okay.
Because if you put it just above the support, then you still kind of allow it. It can still, that point can still be the fulcrum in some sense. Not the fulcrum, but exactly how do I put it? The pivot.
Yeah, got it.
But by putting it further out, you are countering that. Oh yeah, and then the things like this, like again, like especially with birds and animals, like background and depth of field, catch light in the eye. Like if the eye is in focus, then like most else is forgiven. So there are like little examples of this. I love pelicans and how they fly very close to the waves. So the wingtip is almost like in the water. It's almost touching the water. It probably is. I don't know. But then what makes also that you can look it directly in the eye. You can see its eye clearly. And this is a simple one on like the background and depth of focus kind of. There was a green bush and it's completely smeared and just become this nice green backdrop. And the bird is completely in focus and it just pops right out. Right. So I think, okay, I've already taken up a lot of time. I was not thinking I would take so much time. But in terms of like, if you're interested in all kinds of things about photography, there's a very comprehensive course. There's a professor emeritus from Stanford, and then he worked at Google for a number of years. So I took his course. His presentations and slides are available online, and I have the links. And then also his lectures are available on YouTube. And he covers everything from technology to all sorts of stuff about taking pictures, about so it's more of it's I would say it's more on the technical side and not as much on the artistic side, but nonetheless it's a fascinating class. And then I put in a plug for a whole bunch of other like generic photography stuff that I have found interesting. And I have links to these things. I can share. And I categorize these as inspirational in the sense that you look at these things and you say like, yeah, they've taken great.
Raminder,
I think the second last name is spelled, the last name should be spelled Iyer, right?
Which one?
No. Mukul, you're doing injustice to one of India's greatest photographers by comparing.
I'm sorry, I clearly did that. All right.
Okay. And Raminder, I think it is Galen Rowell and not Ross.
Oh, Rowell. Yeah, Galen Rowell. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he passed away.
He and his wife, Barbara, both passed away.
Yeah. It's kind of a sad story, yeah.
Sad story.
But I love that book. I mean, that in fact, I want to go and look at those bristlecone pines with the Milky Way kind of thing.
I have both of his books.
Yeah.
Lovely book.
I love, yeah. Ed Weston, Dorothea Land, she has that picture she was one of those people who went around during the Great Depression taking pictures, and she has some amazing, and then Cartier-Bresson is anyway.
Yeah.
And then these are more sort of not so much how-to or inspirational. They're like they border on sort of more philosophical, especially Susan Sontag. Her books are like pretty much philosophical, but she talks about Oh boy, she delves into the impact of and what photography and photographs mean for an individual, for society and culture in terms of how they become sort of representations of truth when it doesn't necessarily mean that they are truth and things like that. And it's a fascinating subject to explore anyway. So I think that's it. I am at the end of my slide. And I'll share. I guess I don't know how are we going to share it, but I can definitely share links to all these things.
I think just share it with Raghu, and Raghu as usual has been sharing the link to the recording. So along with that, the
Perfect.
Yeah, the presentation and also the link to the recording, he'll share it. Raghu?
Yep. Yes, I'll do that. Yeah.
Yeah. Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Awesome
This was
presentation,
superb,
Raminder.
Raminder. Thank you.
We've had 3 fantastic presentations in a row. The bar is being set at a very high level for the next one.
Yeah, I'm worried. But this was wonderful, Raminder.
Thank you very much.
I got a lot of tips.
Yes, lot of useful tips. I love that tip about the 2 separate buttons for autofocus. That's something that's going to be deployed ASAP. And wind at the back, that's, I mean, people tell you about the sun, but wind at the back is also useful for capturing the bird's wings like that. And
especially big birds like that, because they are going to behave in that fashion. Smaller birds don't care so much.
Yeah, correct. I can see that. I can see that.
So cool.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for listening and putting
great stories to go with the picture so that it's conveys how you get to that shot, right? I mean, very useful.
Brilliant storytelling.
Yes.
Thank you.
And thanks to all for being patient and listening in. We'll have the next session next Saturday, same time, 7:30 India time.
Thanks, Raghu, for making this happen.
Thanks for waiting patiently in the beginning.
Oh, no problem.
No problem.
Yeah. But I hope everybody who waited patiently in the beginning got their, eye full, right?
I don't have a doubt about it.
Yes, it was worth it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Madhur, for setting up these things.
Yep.
So
Madhur
and I are batchmates from the same hostel too. Same department, same hostel, same year.
Okay. Okay, great.
Chalo.
Chalo, thanks, guys.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.